Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back into the studio. This week's video is going to be an excerpt from one of my Patreon videos. If you want to support the channel and watch the full video, which is over an hour long, head over to patreon.com/Eirik Arnesen. You'll find a link in the description below. Enjoy. So with all of this in my mind, I formed my plan. This mold, from this point on, is going to require 3 stages. The first stage is going to be to get the female figure and Kronos' arms off. Well, I'm going to make the mold and then get them off. Once they are off, I will move on to Kronos' legs, make the molds there, and then cut them off. Once the legs are off, I will deal with the torso and the base Kronos is sitting on, and at that point, the entirety of the mold will be done. For each individual section, I'm going to build silicone walls and mother mold shells. Once the mother mold shells are done, I'm going to cut the pieces off and repeat the process for the next stage. So as you can see, this is getting pretty advanced already. Instead of it being one mold, one process, this is the process of 3 different molds rolled into one mold. Today we are going to deal with the green section of our mold, the first stage if you will, where we will work towards removing the female figure, her arm and Kronos' 2 arms. Remove them after we make the molds that will cover them and make sure that we can cast them accurately, of course. Knowing we want to separate the pieces is one part of the story, so now we need to use the concepts outlined at the top to determine where we will separate each of these parts into silicone halves. So knowing we want 2 pieces of silicone, we want them to be broad and shallow rather than narrow and deep, and knowing we want to have a chance at getting into the molds, once they are closed in order to work on the seams from the inside, we can make our decision on where to place the walls. Undercuts are a very important danger to look out for when making a mold. Following these concepts that I've illustrated and told you about above tends to lead you towards a place where undercuts become less of an issue, but it's still something you should know about and pay attention to because they can happen in many different ways. Once you decide on where you want to place your silicone wall, separating the 2 pieces into 2 halves, and certainly before you begin applying the silicone, you want to check for undercuts. The placement of the wall separating the mold piece into 2 halves dictates to a large degree the direction the mother mold shell wants to come off. Undercuts is much less of an issue for silicone as it can flex and bend off your hard cast. Mother molds are made of hard materials and cannot bend and flex. So while we are working only with silicone today, we have to consider the mother mold when placing our silicone walls. So we have to project into the future, if you will. A helpful visualization of an undercut can be looking at a ball. The ball covered in silicone with the walls along the apex of the form. In this scenario, the mother mold comes off no problem. Now, if we were to move these silicone walls off the apex of the ball, however, one side of our mother mold will come off easy, of course, but the other will be locked on as it travels over the apex of the form, cannot bend, and has nowhere to go. It's stuck. The silicone can be flexed off in this situation, but the mother mold is locked on. Now, if we were to keep the wall where it is, but take our previously locked mother mold piece actually, and turn it into 2 pieces, you can see how this entire assembly can now come apart. More often than not, this tends to be the solution I lean towards, as the placement of the wall perfectly on the apex of the form can be quite difficult, and sometimes on a form that's a little bit more complex than a ball, it can be almost impossible. So in my experience, leaning towards having one side need one monomold piece and the other side being a little bit more tricky, needing two monomold pieces, has solved a lot of issues and problems for me and made molds pretty easy to take apart most of the time. Undercuts become more and more of an issue when the piece becomes bigger and bigger. For this first stage of our process, we are dealing with fairly small pieces in the arms and the female figure. When we apply the silicone, we kind of even out the surface, we flatten out everything, and on smaller pieces, this evening out of the surface is even more substantial, leaving us with potentially no undercut or very, very shallow undercut if we do follow the concepts outlined above in the video about a wide and shallow mold, half and two halves of silicone per mold. So it tends to be a little bit less of an issue in smaller pieces than it is in larger pieces. With our plan formed and solidified, the order of operation established, we can begin in earnest to do the work, which I've already been doing here on the video while explaining to you my plan, of course. However, I would never begin any of this work without having my plan formed already. So plan first and then execute your plan. That's it for today. I hope you learned a thing or two during this tutorial. And if you did, please let me know in the comments below. And if there's anything that you think that I can do better, let me know as well. Until next time, stay creative.